Hey guys, welcome back to my channel and a very special welcome if you're new. My name is Shelly, the owner and creator of the Vintage Hen and Chick, and in today's video we're going to be doing some simple and fun springtime thrift flips. So if you enjoy trash to treasure upcycles, thrift flips, furniture flips, or just crafting in general, then you're in the right place. Now make sure and subscribe to my channel, and that way you'll get notified whenever I upload a new video. Now let's get started. For project one, I have this cabinet door that I picked up at my local restore. You can get them thrift stores, the restore, garage sales, or even you might have some old cabinet door fronts in your garage. And I'm going to start out by giving this cabinet door 2 good coats of Dixie Belle Buttercream chalk paint. And what we're going to do is we're going to turn this cabinet door into a beautiful piece of springtime home decor that you can hang on your walls. So I'm going to give this 2 coats of the buttercream chalk paint. I'll let it dry thoroughly in between each coat, and then once it's dried completely, then we'll move on to the next step of this project. Okay, so my cabinet door has gotten 2 coats of paint. I let it dry thoroughly in between, and now we're going to move on to the next step. And we're going to do something really fun and unique with this cabinet door. And so I am going to take IOD's Garden Bouquet stamp, and we're going to stamp some florals on this door front. But first of all, these are brand new stamps, and so the first thing you have to do whenever you use a new stamp is just take a piece of sandpaper and go over the back of the stamp with your sandpaper. This gives your stamp a little bit of grit, and it helps for the stamp to hold on to the ink. So I'm going to do that to both the pieces that I chose from the stamp set. Give it a little rough up with the sandpaper, and then I'm going to take IOD's black ink and I'm going to stamp the back side of the stamp. Getting a good coat on there, not too much, but enough so that I can get a good image on my cabinet door. So I'm going to add my ink to the stamp, and then I'm going to take the stamp and eyeball where I want it on this door front. And then I'll take my hand, one hand, hold the stamp down, and then I'll use the other hand to rub around the stamp until I get what I think is a good image. And then whenever you're done with your stamps, you want to take a wet paper towel or a baby wipe and wipe off the ink off the back of your stamps. So I'm going to do it again with the other floral design, inking it up, placing it where I want on the cabinet door front, and then rubbing it with one hand while I hold the other. And then once I think I have a good image on there, then I'm going to gently lift the stamp up. So I let the ink dry thoroughly on here, and here is where we're going to do something really fun to the project. And we're going to take a few different colors of Dixie Belle chalk paint. We're going to use flamingo, sea glass, and farmhouse green. And I'm going to take the chalk paint and I am going to paint the stamped image in completely. So one flower set is going to be the flamingo, one flower set's going to be the sea glass, and then for the stems I'm going to use the farmhouse green. And so I'm just taking a fine artist brush here and painting in the areas where I stamped. Now this, you do not have to be neat, you don't have to worry about staying in the lines. You actually want to paint a little bit outside of your stamped lines, and that's going to give the final outcome a really nice look, and you'll see when we get to that part of the project. So you'll just fill in all of your stamped areas with your chosen color of paint, going outside the inked lines just a little bit. And so I finished the flamingo flowers, and now I'm doing the other set of flowers in the sea glass. So I'll continue to paint inside these flowers, filling them in, and then I'm going to take my farmhouse green and do the stems and the leaves on the flowers, and then we'll move on to the next part of the project. So I've got all my stamped areas painted with the colors I chose, and I let them dry thoroughly. And this looks a little weird right now, but this is where the magic happens. I'm going to take the exact same stamps that I originally used. I'm going to re-ink them up, and then I'm going to stamp over the painted area. And what this is going to do is it's going to bring out the flowers, add a bold definition to your image, and just make it look really cool, like a unique piece of original artwork. And so I'm doing the same thing, laying the stamp down, rubbing it with my hand, and then once I lift it up, wait until you see how that looks. Doesn't that look awesome? So I'm going to do that with the other flower on the other side, ink up the stamp, and then eyeball exactly where, match it up where you stamped it the original time, and then press it down with your hand, rub around the whole stamp so you have good ink coverage over your painted surface, and then gently lift up your stamp. So I wanted to add some wording to my image, and so I am using IOD's letterpress stamps, and I'm going to stamp the words spring blooms on my wall hanging. And I'm going to start with the word spring, and I've taken this thin mount here and I've put my letters going up and down. And now I'm just taking my black ink, inking up the word spring, and then I'm going to place it along the left hand side of my image, eyeballing it where I want it to go, and then like I did with the flowers, holding it in place with one hand and then rubbing every area with the other hand until it's ready for me to lift up my stamp. And then I'm going to wipe off those letters, and then I'm going to do the word blooms on the other side of my sign. And so I have them laid out on my thin mount, how I want them to show up. And I'm missing one O because I only have one O in my set. So I left a placeholder for that, and I'll come back and fill that in. So I'm going to take this side of the stamp, lay that down, gently press it in place, and then lift it up. And then I'll clean off my stamp with a wet baby wipe. And then I'm going to take all the other letters off that I'm not using and then just re-ink up that O and put that down where it belongs. So for the final step in this sign, it needs to be sealed, and for that I'm going to use Dixie Belle Satin Clear Coat, and I'm going to give it a good coat of the clear coat all over the whole sign. I let the ink dry thoroughly. It is permanent, but you want to make sure that you dry it thoroughly, so that way when you come in to do your top coat that you don't smear any ink. So I let it dry good, and then I'm just going over the whole top of the sign and the sides of the sign with the satin clear coat, giving it a nice coverage, and then I will let that dry, and once that's dry, then our sign will be complete. Here is the completed project. I think this turned out so nice. I love doing that double stamp technique. I think it gives pieces such an original and unique look. What do you think of how this completed project turned out? Let me know in the comments. For project 2, I am going to upcycle this breadboard. Now, I got this at a thrift store, and somebody had already added this stencil to the breadboard. And normally I would just paint right over it, but it does have a little bit of a raised edge on it. So I'm going to take it out into my garage and sand off that stencil. So that way I'm starting out with a nice smooth surface. So I took it out in my garage, gave it a little bit of a sand with some 220 grit sandpaper and my orbital sander, and now I have a smooth surface to start with. And I'm going to paint this breadboard in the color Vintage Duck Egg, which is a chalk paint by Dixie Belle. I love this color. I think it's a beautiful springtime color. It's also a really nice kind of French country color. So I'm going to give the breadboard 2 good coats of the Vintage Duck Egg, and then I'm going to let it dry thoroughly, and then we'll move on to the next step of this project. I gave the breadboard 2 coats of the Vintage Duck Egg. I let it dry, and now I'm taking IOD's ephemeral type stamp, and I'm going to stamp this over the whole breadboard. And what's unique about this stamp is these are all individual stamps on one sheet. You can either do it all on one sheet like this, or you can peel off which ones you want to use individually. I'm going to do them all at one time. And I took my sandpaper and I roughed up the back of this stamp first because I've not used this one before. It's brand new. And now I'm taking my black ink and I'm stamping up the back of the stamp, getting a good coat of ink on there. And then I'm going to flip that over and eyeball where I want it to go on the breadboard. And with stamps, you just have to hold it in place with one hand and kind of rub around the rest of the stamp with the other one, just to make sure that you get a nice clear stamp on your project. So I'm going to do that, and then once I feel it's good, then I'm going to lift up the stamp and I have a good image on my breadboard. And then you always want to take a wet paper towel or a baby wipe and clean off the ink off the back of your stamps as soon as you're done using them. And I do want to add some stamp to the handle of the breadboard, so I'm just taking a small area out of the stamp that I want to use, put some ink on there, and then I'm going to stamp the handle. And then I'm going to let this ink dry thoroughly, and then we're going to move on to the next step. I've let my ink dry from the first stamp, and now I'm going to stamp this cow from the IOD Farm Animal Stamp Set on top of the breadboard. And so I'm just going to take the cow and I'm going to ink it up good, and then I'm going to place it on the breadboard where I want it to be. Now, normally, if you do this process and you want your cow to stand out with the other stamp in the background, you would stamp the cow first, put a mask over it, and then stamp the background stamp. But I'm going to do a little bit of a different process here, and so it doesn't really matter. So I'm going to stamp my cow down, and then I'm going to let it completely dry, and then we're going to move on to the next process of this breadboard. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my Dixie Belle Fluff chalk paint, and I am going to paint the cow image completely. And so I'm just taking an artist brush and my fluff chalk paint, and I'm painting the inside stamped area of the cow. Now, like I said before, you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to stay in the lines. As a matter of fact, you want to paint right outside of your stamped lines to get the best effect when we're done. So I'm just going to completely paint this cow in. I am going to give it 2 coats of the fluff so I have a nice bright white before we move on. I did give my cow 2 coats of the fluff chalk paint, and I let it dry thoroughly. And now I'm going to take the cow stamp again, and I'm going to take my black ink again, and I'm going to stamp the back of the stamp. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to stamp over my painted area where the cow is. And so I'm doing the same process here where I'm inking this up and then very carefully placing it over the cow and matching it up to the painted area. And then once I have it matched up, I'm going to hold it down with one hand and rub the rest of the stamp with the other hand to make sure I get all of those details on this cow stamped properly. Once I feel like I have that done, then I'll lift the stamp up and this is the result. I let the ink dry thoroughly on the cow and now I'm going to seal it with my favorite Dixie Belle satin clear coat. So I'm going to give the breadboard one good coat of the top coat all over the top, sealing in my cow, sealing in the paint, and sealing in the stamp. For the final touch on this breadboard, I'm going to take this adorable ribbon. It's farmhouse ribbon. I got this from the dollar store probably 2 or 3 years ago. And I'm just going to cut a piece off and I'm going to string it in through the hole on the breadboard and tie a little knot in it. And then this breadboard is done. Here is the completed breadboard. I really like how it turned out and I hope you do too. Let me know in the comments what you think. For project 3, we have a wooden tote. And I have to apologize, I lost the footage of the before of this tote. But what I did is I gave this whole tote 2 good coats of Dixie Belle silk paint in the color Prickly Pear. And the reason I used the silk paint is because it's got a base coat, a color, and a top coat in one. And I wanted to go over it with a chalk paint. And so I'm going to go over it with 2 coats of Dixie Belle's chalk paint in the color Flamingo. And the other reason is I wanted the silk paint to stay in place, and then the chalk paint I wanted to lightly distress back. So I'm going to give the tote 2 good coats of the Flamingo chalk paint, and then I'll let it dry thoroughly, and then we'll move on to the next step. After I applied the Flamingo chalk paint, I let it dry thoroughly, and now I'm just taking a wet rag and I'm going to wet distress the tote just in areas where I think it would naturally distress if it were used. And I just want that pink prickly pear color to peek through that Flamingo color. I like the contrast between the 2 colors, and so I'm going to just wet distress over the entire tote just random spots here and there, just so you can see little peaks of that prickly pear coming through the flamingo. I have my distressing done, and you can see that pink color peeking through that orange color, and I really like the contrast and the looks of that. And now we're going to adorn this whole tote, and we're going to use transfers from the IOD Rose Botanical Transfer Set. And what I did is I just cut out a bunch of random transfers that I thought would look nice on this tote, and I'm going to kind of place them where I want them to go and then start applying them. And we're going to go around the whole tote. And so once I get figured out where I want my transfer to be, I'll trim it up, kind of place it and position it until I get it exactly where I want. And then I'll take the backing off the transfer, lay my transfer down, and then you start from one side of the transfer and you use the transfer tool that comes with all the transfer sets, and you rub over the transfer until it's adhered to the surface below. And once you have that done, then you start on one side and gently start removing your transfer vellum, working slowly, going from one side to the other, and you'll see that the transfer is adhered below. And so I'm going to continue to do that, working from one side to the other, removing my transfer vellum. Once I have that vellum off of the transfer, then I'm going to take that vellum and burnish my transfer in. So I'm going to rub over the transfer and make sure that it's really adhered to the surface and that there are no bubbles or wrinkles in the transfer. And so I'm just going to continue to apply the transfers around the whole tote. I'm going to use words, I'm going to use different florals, just kind of picking and choosing what I think is going to look good and placing them where I want them to go. So I have all my transfers applied, and now it's time to seal the tote. And for that, I'm using Dixie Belle's white wax. You do need to seal your transfers in, and you need to seal your chalk paint in. And so I'm going to take a wax brush and get a good healthy coat of the white wax over the entire tote. I'm going to apply it all over, and then once I have it on the tote, I'm going to let it sit aside for a few minutes just to let that wax kind of absorb into the chalk paint. And then once that's done, then I'm going to take a paper towel and start buffing back the excess wax and kind of buffing it to the sheen that I want on the tote. So here I'm just taking a dry paper towel. You could use a dry rag as well, soft cloth, and I'm just buffing back the excess wax and getting everything off that I want off and kind of buffing it up so it comes to a nice sheen. The reason that I chose to use the wax is because this is an old tote made out of some old wood, and it had some imperfections in the wood, and so I wanted to kind of highlight those with the wax. And I also wanted to give this tote kind of a soft pastel-y look, and I thought the white wax would be a great way to do that. So I'm going to continue to buff back all the wax until it looks the way I want, and then this project is complete. Here is the completed tote. I really love the way it turned out. I love the contrast between the pink and the orangey color. I love the transfers all the way around, and I really like how the white wax brings out the imperfections in the wood and kind of softens up the look of the tote. Let me know what you think in the comments. All of the products I used in today's video are available on my website, thevintagehenandchick.com, and I'll leave that information below in the description box. Thank you so much for watching today's video. I hope I've inspired you to upcycle your thrifted, garage sale, and old home decor, because it's so much fun to turn it into something more current or more your style. I'll be back next week with another video, and I hope to see you then. Be sure to subscribe to my channel and hit that notification bell, and that way you'll get notified every time I upload a new video. Thank you all so much for watching, and have a wonderful day.